Welcome everyone. We are going to extrapolate some of the basic usage of a Steam Deck, even though the device is not out yet. This video was meant for an early November release, but since Valve has informed everyone that there has been a delay of about 2 months and shipping has been bumped back from December 21 to Q1 22, my friend went, screw it, let's over-edit the living daylights out of this video. And so we did. So, even if the release was delayed, we're still going to discuss some of the usage of the device aimed at normal users, because I find myself in a peculiar position where I think I can help get you up to speed on a platform that is unfamiliar to many future users. I've been pushed into using KDE Manjaro for the past year and a half, and it is in major parts very similar to what the Steam Deck will be running. In fact, it's what Valve themselves recommend developers use as they prepare for the deck. Quick disclaimer. I'm not affiliated with Valve, nor any of the operating systems, nor the various software packages I'm going to mention in this video. I'm not receiving monetary compensation in any form. This is meant solely to share some basic knowledge on how to deal with an Arch-based operating system and some of Steam's own idiosyncrasies. If you're not interested in my background and just want to take my word for knowing what I'm doing, go to Chapter 2 at 7 minutes. Let me give you a breakdown as to how and why I got into this position, and you can decide if you want to keep listening. I have been a Windows user since DOS, then with Windows 3.11 added on top, then upgraded to 95. I moved to Windows 98, then an ill-fated 2 weeks of Millennium Edition, which I promptly threw back at the store in rage, learning that you have to skip every other version of Windows as they are, well... Lesson learned, I used Windows 2000 for a good long while, and somewhere in there tried out Linux. It was a disaster. It was either some ancient Red Hat or SUSE version that a friend gave me. I installed it, messed with it, then didn't remember the key combination to initiate shutdown. There was no graphical option to do so, and I had no idea how to get into terminal. So after some trial and no internet to check what I was doing wrong, as this was still in the days when modems screamed at you and at each other in order to connect to anything, I resigned and powered off the system. It refused to boot back up after that. I imagine many people will think of something like this whenever Linux is mentioned. I personally thus continued with Windows XP for years, then upgraded to 7 and had a second brush with Linux. A different friend convinced me to install Ubuntu on dual boot. Now Ubuntu was nice, fairly easy, not too harshly different from Windows. It's a very popular distribution to this day, unsurprisingly. It updates slowly but stably, is easy to switch to from Windows, and has a solid user base, as well as various forums full of helpful people that have answered dozens and hundreds of questions, or help with individual problems. The trouble was, a decade ago, the makers of Ubuntu decided to switch to Unity Desktop, and I hated it. I wasn't savvy enough to install my own desktops or anything, and Ubuntu fell from being a curiosity to complete disuse. It might still be on that netbook, unopened since 2011. So instead I stuck with Windows. I'd consider myself an advanced to power user on the Windows environment, using computers since I was 5, building my own, fixing other people's. But towards the end of 7's lifespan, Microsoft started to implement some not so savory choices. I manually disabled individual knowledge base downloads that updates now shipped, which relentlessly advertised to switch to Windows 10. I wasn't necessarily a fan of the idea of forced updates for 10, although I understood Microsoft's reasoning behind it, but I was using a Windows 10 machine at work, and little things like adverts for their own products, asking twice whether I was sure that I didn't want Edge over Firefox, the intrusive pushing of Windows Store. Things like that really turned me off the quote-unquote last Windows ever. So I stuck with 7, way past its expiration date, quite foolishly so, and was already thinking about putting Linux on my next computer. Unclavoyant as I was, I didn't think a global pandemic and scalpels would make buying a new computer unfeasible in a not-too-distant future. I was thinking about various Linux distros when I caught a Linus Tech Tips video on gaming on Linux. Anthony Young was presenting various options that let you play games well. Pop!OS ended up being his recommendation of choice, but I noted the Arch-based Manjaro in there, and that piqued my interest. I'd heard that Arch can be customized to hell and back, and that spoke to me. So I ran it side by side with the Windows 10 install that my then new laptop came with, and I liked it. But my Windows 7 PC was still running and I was used to it, so I didn't switch. Until I was forced. Somewhere around late 2019 or so, my motherboard died, and you all know what PC part prices were back then, and partially still are. Especially graphics cards, CPUs, and later hard disks, with the Bitcoin and Chia craze and hardware scalping nonsense. So I went with my laptop full-time, disinterested in funding scalpers' fantasy prices to build a new desktop. Only I thought, how about I update everything first? I don't seem to learn. Windows 10 decided to commit suicide and refused to work again short of a reinstall, and really, at that point, I didn't feel like it anymore. So for almost 2 years I've been using Manjaro as my daily driver, and while not a Linux crack by any means, I managed to work with the OS to the point that my next computer is going to have Linux on it, period. So, I used to be a very Windows-centric user, and while I'm still not all that knowledgeable about Linux, I'm liking it. I got it to work with most games, which is nice, although I'm missing some compatibility, which is not Linux's fault. I have a master's in digital arts. I'm a bit of a generalist, but mostly do 3D modeling and animating, video, photos and painting, and the big companies in those sectors refuse to support Linux. I have for decades, really. But I'm in the design and HUD space, so I thought I'd offer you what knowledge I've gleaned from running a probably as close to Steam Deck environment as currently exists. And most importantly, how to play games on it. I've seen a lot of people saying, I'll just install Windows and use Steam like I'm used to. There are a couple of problems with this approach, which is why I wanted to prepare you for giving Linux a try. First is the problem with Windows' massive space requirements. A 20GB install of Windows 10 hasn't been unusual, with a 1903 update from May 2019 upping that to a whopping 32GB. Windows 11 in this Microsoft document wants a staggering 64GB OS-specific storage. That's the entirety of the smallest tier Steam Deck. You'd need to install any games exclusively to SD card. Even if you stick with Windows 10, that's half of your space gone. Second problem is the responsiveness. Windows is going to demand a lot more of the hardware compared to a custom built and focused SteamOS, meaning you're losing performance. Likely a lot. If you still want to, you can dual boot Windows and give it a go, but I'd wager the experience isn't going to be a great one, though Valve leaves it up to the user. If you think you'll be missing some popular apps,
stay a while and listen.
So with that out of the way, let's assume we'll stick to the SteamOS and get into it. We've got specs of the device, we've even got a couple of preview videos. Well, especially mention Adam Savage's Tested and Linus Tech Tips videos about the hands-on hour and a half with the Steam Deck. And we know that it will run SteamOS 3, which we have some tentative footage of, but isn't close to final yet. Even the already shipped dev kits are prohibited from sharing anything, since SteamOS is still being heavily worked on up until and past release. We are going to be looking at the classic desktop version of Steam, as well as the big picture variant, and draw some tentative speculation about the Steam Deck's operation. Now we have some guessing to do, but I'd wager the Steam Deck will boot up the underlying Arch and directly into the Steam overlay by default. It would only make sense for Valve to direct the customers to their own software, where they have an overarching experience that can be navigated with the controller, giving most people a gaming handheld with a library and the Steam store, and nothing else to worry about. Looking back at their games, Valve has always followed a philosophy of directing the player as much as they could, i.e. pointing them in the right direction naturally, and I'd be incredibly surprised if by default they'd boot into the KDE desktop and you'd have to click on Steam after the fact, as they seem to be designing SteamOS 3 as a complete operating system. How exactly navigation will work is currently unknown, but from the promotional material and big picture mode, it seems to be via tile library style, where you can search or choose your games, and then get into the game's individual page, from where you can launch or mess with the settings and the like, using joysticks and buttons, or touchscreens, or the touchpads. Starting a game is going to be interesting. Very few current games, although the number is growing, which I wholeheartedly cheer for, run natively on Linux. That means they won't start, you don't have a .exe file to click, and they usually don't get to have access to the operating system as deeply as on Windows, a fact that the anti-cheat companies are very annoyed by. And that's where Proton comes in. Valve developed Proton from Wine, a compatibility layer that's been in development since 1993. I mean, look at the website, just kidding. And allows Windows-specific applications to be run on Linux. And this isn't the same as emulation, which basically means that Wine apps usually run with much less lag compared to a virtualized machine, but also much less stably unless a painstaking amount of work is just put into optimizing. Like so many things on Linux, Wine is open source, and the folks at Valve grabbed a version of Wine around 2017 or 18 and built their own version, Proton, which is specifically geared towards playing Windows-based video games. Where does all of this matter? Well, the ProtonDB.com that you can see scrolling in the background shows you a list of all the games that Proton has made compatible with Linux. You can play any of them in your Linux environment, and depending on the rating, you can expect a better or worse performance. Valve is also going to indicate which games are going to work how well directly on the tiles. It's highly likely that this list is going to grow and fast, and games are going to achieve platinum compatibility quickly, with the force of Valve and the as of yet unknown amount of Steam Deck sales behind it. Why is that though? One of the biggest problems with many Windows top titles has been the anti-cheat and anti-piracy software involved. Systems like Easy Anti-Cheat, Denuvo and BattlEye analyze your PC very deeply, looking into open processes, files and whatever else they can sniff into, in order to make sure you aren't cheating. Linux generally doesn't allow that. Valve has made its own server-side anti-cheat algorithm a while back, the VAC, which isn't widely adopted and incredibly one-minded, as well as frustratingly inflexible. Now though, with pressure from Valve, and enough people buying this deck to make it economically feasible, or at least the pressure high enough, EAC and BattlEye will allow their software to run within Proton, a thing that they were violently opposed to in the past. And both EAC and BattlEye have confirmed that they are going to be allowing Proton users, although each gaming company will have to adjust their games on their own. Here comes the kicker though, and one of the first practical things I can teach you. There's a difference between Proton run games and native Linux games. Here, for example, is me hitting install on Volcanoids. It installs, I can play it no problem. It is a game with a Linux native version after all. But when I try to play with a friend of mine, we can't join each other's games. This depends a lot on the game. Avorion, for instance, has no problem connecting a session running on Linux with one running on Windows, at least when I tested it. But many games do not support cross-platform. In that case, we'll need to force Steam to use the Proton compatibility layer. To use Windows executables, basically. I'm going to uninstall Volcanoids, then right-click on the game, choose Properties, Compatibility, and then tick the Force the use of a specific Steam Play compatibility toolbox. We get a drop-down menu with various Proton versions, and here comes the second hard-earned piece of knowledge. Not all Proton versions are the same. This, for instance, is Drake Hollow. According to the ProtonDB, it runs Platinum, no trouble at all, on Ubuntu. Arch and Ubuntu aren't quite samey enough to be able to assume that what runs on one will run on the other though, so sometimes getting a game to work is a bit of trial and error. While Proton Experimental should be the most up-to-date, sometimes an older, or much older version works the best. This is me playing Drake Hollow in Experimental. You can see how choppy it is. That's not the recording software. I have to use Proton 4.11-13 for it to work smoothly, and even that had, before the last update to the game itself, no sound. But I got good frame rates, and I can play with friends on Windows machines. The tutorial videos never worked in the game though, no matter what Proton version I tried. This might be DirectX related. The good news is that you don't have to re-download the whole game again. You only need to do this if you switch between Linux native and Proton compatible versions, and Valve seems to be working on that. Switching between Proton versions will often require you to re-download and install frameworks like Visual C, .NET and whatnot, but Steam does this automatically, and you don't need to re-download the whole game if you're only trying to find out which version works best. So don't be discouraged. Your game might still run, and even run with friends. It just might take ticking a box and trying some Proton versions to get it to work correctly. I'd suggest starting with 4.11, it's been the best on my Arch, and then go up in versions. If you're having issues with responsiveness, capping FPS in the in-game options has helped me in several cases. A word of warning though, save files. Since games you run in Proton mode basically each build a little Windows, uninstalling the game will uninstall this complete quote-unquote virtual machine and might take some saves with it as it does so. Steam Cloud may well be a way to go there for the games that support it. Otherwise, back up your saves. Sadly, I've got zero experience in modifying a Proton launcher to work with some individual games that might just not run under Steam, so I'm going to leave that up to the more programming-minded Linux pros, who can be found on Lutris. We're taking a step back from Proton, and even Steam. Some games might refuse to run with Proton, or at least run passable. This is Warframe, available on Steam, but also has its own launcher. Trying to play this on any version of Proton has been a massive letdown on my machine's hardware. Choppy, slow, often crashing, though for many people it works great out of the box with Proton. I guess I just got lucky here. This, however, is running fairly smoothly, and that's because we have another resource to turn to. This is Lutris. Lutris users create custom wine launchers for various games, usually those that are standalone, GOG, Humble Bundle, or even if you want custom arguments for a Steam game. Also the more contented storefronts like Blizzard, Ubisoft and Epic. Here I'm running Ubisoft's Ghost Recon Breakpoint even more stably than my friends on their Windows machines, honestly, who keep having weird microstarter issues intermittently. But Breakpoint is fairly alone in being playable on Ubi's front, and I don't think I'd be able to join PvP matches. This is running without Battleeye installed, which took some futzing with the files, and trying Wildlands or Division 2 kicked me instantly when I tried to connect to my friends, as these run on EAC. And so far, Ubisoft hasn't taken the complicated step of mailing those two anti-cheat companies that they'll allow Linux users. They thought it would be better to make a user poll first, I guess. Ubisoft and its horrendous practices aside, there is a launcher for Lutris. It required some fiddling initially, but seems to have resolved the issues I had when I started with it, and I got Warframe to run a lot better on Lutris than on Steam. So if you want to play games that aren't available on Valve's platform, Lutris might have you covered. The desktop app makes things a lot more convenient, and we'll have a look into how to install it in the chapter after the next. Also, a little aside, if you want to support Steam and Lutris in their efforts, and give them feedback about what works and what doesn't. Engineers need bug reports and people who just try things in order to improve their games. I'm fairly certain that Valve will be adding some way of pairing controllers within SteamOS, but in case they don't, or you are planning on connecting more exotic peripherals like Bluetooth headsets, speakers, keyboards and what have you, let's take a look at the settings. Of course, now these are Manjaro KDE settings, which are likely to be very similar to what we'll see in the SteamOS. We can safely skip stuff like hardware configuration and kernel. These are likely going to be handled by the SteamOS. If you know what these do, you surely don't need this video. Appearance might be interesting for the KDE desktop. I personally prefer dark themes, and as you can see my taskbar on the left, as I find it easier on the eye and better suited for the widescreens we use today. But this is all personal preference. Since the deck ships with an LCD rather than an OLED screen, there isn't going to be much battery life to be squeezed from going dark. You might want to download and use different icon sets, or get new themes, cursors, what have you. As a KDE-based OS, SteamOS should have these options. If you take a quick peek at Linus's video, you can see the striking similarities. Here's me switching between monitors. But the more important options are coming now. Input devices is where you manage connected peripherals, like keyboards, mice and controllers. Next up is display and monitor. This one is important if you plug in a second or primary screen, and it isn't where it's supposed to be, doesn't display the colors as intended, and so on. SteamOS will probably handle power management, but further down we find the last really relevant option, Bluetooth. And besides turning it off and on again, you can pair devices here, as I'm doing with an 8-bit DO controller right now. Then once connected, We can go back to the input devices and check if it registers all buttons, and if it does so correctly. Let's take a look at apps. Being based on KDE Arch, it's a near guarantee that SteamOS will ship with Pacman Package Manager, and I'm guessing there will be a graphical interface like this. This is Octopi, and it's thankfully easy to use. Let's go with two free Linux games, SuperTux Kart and 0AD. Let's type in SuperTux, there it is already. Right click, install, search for 0AD, there it is, right click, install. We also want to install the dependencies, if there are any, and then just hit apply. Downloaded, installed, ready to play. Alternatively, and fairly likely, it might come with a package manager or app store like Pamac here, which is a lot more graphically friendly for new users, and supports exploring different categories of software. An especially interesting thing to run on the Steam Deck are going to be emulators. I don't know up to what console generation emulation will be feasible, but we'll see that in time. Emulators allow you to play your older games on a modern PC, and since many of the game companies refuse to republish their classic titles, emulation in good old games are often the only way of playing some of those classic titles. If you don't want to get caught in the grey to black zone of illegality, you can of course only play ROMs that are dumped from a cartridge of an older game that you already own. Big asterisk here, look at the note. But once you have acquired a ROM, there are various options for emulating them on modern systems. With Arch, and often generally, I can wholeheartedly recommend RetroArch. It's essentially a front end for over 100 possible emulators, so not really one in itself, but gives you a lot of comfort options and ways to manage your library. And while it's easy to install via the package manager, it also got released on Steam itself. I'm confident it will integrate well with the deck, especially if the devs gear towards it. And there are other emulators that work very well with Arch, but as there are a ton of consoles, and some of them have between 1 and 10 emulators to them, it would burst the scope of this video. There are great creators on YouTube, and many more forum entries to dip your toes into emulation, and most emulators are really just a search on the package manager and a click to install away. Even Cemu, a Wii U emulator, supposedly runs excellent with Wine, and is supposed to get a Linux native version. I heartily recommend emulating your old games, even if it is a bit of a learning step. It's great to play your classics again, and the form factor of the Game Gear is going to be killer for it. Currently the premier way of connecting gamers. I'm not specifically a fan of Discord and its self-aggrandizing descriptions, but I feel like they got a marketing team that rebuilt the whole website's text for them, because these days I can't find any of that. I haven't forgotten though. Anyway, since Microsoft drove Skype into the ground, and TeamSpeak and Ventrilo have gotten a bit long in the tooth, Discord has been the hangout of choice for many gamers. I'd suggest trying Element, which is based off of Matrix, but it's in heavy development, and even though it stands heads over shoulders over many competitors, encryption-wise, it's best suited for person-to-person talking rather than groups. But yeah, that was that. We installed Discord from Pamac Package Manager, logged in, and Discord's up and running. Another app that I've read people wanting to install on a Windows-based Steam Deck is apparently Microsoft Office. LibreOffice can work with Microsoft Office's files, and the functionalities are very comparable. Writer is the equivalent to Word, Calc is, at least to me, indistinguishable from Excel, and Impress is PowerPoint, although I do have to put a little asterisk here, in that it sometimes has trouble correctly reading PowerPoint files. Then again, I see no issue why somebody couldn't attach a dock to the deck, plug in an HDMI and run a presentation off of the handheld, so Impress might be for you. Well then, those are some basics that are hopefully going to come in handy. I was going to add about another third again as much information to the video and give you a rundown on using the terminal, but honestly I use the terminal so little that after a year and a half I still have to look up the syntax on most basic commands. KDE is very usable in GUI these days, and I might show you some cool features when I get my deck, for those of you who are interested in a quote-unquote advanced class, but for now I've cut all that. And there are many good tutorials out there. I hope you found some of this useful. Keep in mind to try Proton versions if things don't run right away. Installing stuff is laughably easy. Give Lutris a try before giving up on a game, and get some classic games going with an emulator. If you have predictions or better ways of going about things, I'm always interested in learning, as are the people who'd watch this video, I'd wager, so check the comments. I hope you'll have fun with your deck and KDE. I for one am very interested in what all we can do with it come, well, 2022. Best of luck out there, and until next time.